Today we're going to be looking at converting measurements within a single system of measurement, either customary or metric, from a larger unit to a smaller unit. We're only going to be focusing on customary in this video. Another standard that we have not talked about yet is to create a line plot to display a data set generated by measuring length to the nearest quarter inch and interpret the line plot. So we're also going to be looking at the second standard in this video. So let's begin by looking at how to measure to the nearest quarter inch. If we look here, we see that we have the red line, which has gone just past the 5. That tells me that the 5 is my whole number. But I also need to find a fraction to turn this into a mixed number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to partition this into an equal parts. So right now I have my rectangle. I find my line that represents halves, which would be right there. Then I'm going to partition it into fourths, which would be right there. If you look, this part of the red line only takes up 1 out of those 4 pieces to make 5 1/4 inches. Let's look at another one. Looking at this one, what would be my whole number? That's correct. My whole number would be 4, because the line goes just past the 4. Then we need to figure out the fraction for this. So to find the fraction, I need to partition my rectangle into 4 pieces. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Then I look and I see that the red line right here takes up 1 of those pieces. So 4 1/4 inches. Alright. I want you to pause the video and try to solve this one on your own. Alright, so one thing you're going to notice is that this red line, did it ever touch the number 1? No, it did not. That means you are not going to have a whole number. You're only going to have a fraction. So to find my fraction, I'm going to take my rectangle and I'm going to partition it into halves and then into fourths. So if we look, this red line takes up 2 out of the 4 pieces, so 2/4 of an inch. But we also know that an equivalent fraction to 2/4 would be 1/2 of an inch. So this right here is what we call a line plot. If you notice, a line plot looks very similar to a bar graph. The difference with a line plot is that we're not drawing the bars. We are only placing a symbol. In this case, we're placing an X. And you will notice that for each X, that represents 1 box. So here we see the number of days. So what I can do is I can look on day 4, and I can see that on day 4, they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes delivered to their house. What about day 10? How many boxes did they have delivered on day 10? So if we look at day 10, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they had 6 boxes on day 10. Now, it's not just enough to be able to look at one and understand how to count it. We also have to be able to generate our own. So here we have some measurements that were already given to us. And what we need to do is we need to plot them on our line plot. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by finding how many 5s I have. So I have 1, 2, 3 5s. That means I'm going to put 1, 2, 3 5s under there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my 6s. And I see that I have 1, 2, 3 6s. 1, 2, 3. Then I will look at my 7s. I see I have 1, 2, and that is all the 7s I have. I'm going to look at 8s, and I do not see any 8s. Now you notice that the rest of the measurements are halves, so 5 halves, 7 halves, 6 halves. But nowhere on my line plot are the halves. This is where I have to infer where they would be. So I'm going to start with 5 halves, and I notice that I have 1, 2, 3, 5 halves. So right about here would be my halfway mark. So 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to do 6 halves. I see I have 1, 2. Okay, so that would be right about here. 1, 2. And then lastly, I need to find my 7 halves. So 1, 2, 3. So right about here. 1, 2, 3. We have just created our own line plot. Let's look at one more example of how to create a line plot. So again, we've been given some measurements. What we have to do is we have to place them on our line. So the first thing I'm going to do is start with my 8s. So I'm going to look at all my 8s. 1, 2, 3. And I would put 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to look at my 9s. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Then I need to look at what? That's right, my 10s. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3. Now again, we have to do the halfway marks. So I'm going to start with 8 halves, which I have 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3. And I can also, on my line, I can label that as 8 1/2 if that helps me. Then that way I could go ahead and label this as 9 1/2 and then 10 1/2. So let's do 9 1/2 next. 1, 2, 3. We would have 1, 2, 3. And then lastly, we would do 10 halves, which we have 1 of. So when I'm analyzing my line plot, I can see that the least amount would be 10 1/2, while the rest of the measurements are all equal to each other.